Good afternoon. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and I am so very pleased to have with me a longtime colleague, Bruce Drews, who was the former director of the Idaho LTAP Center, and now in his retirement is providing gravel roads training across the country and has agreed to do that for us today. So he will be your instructor, not only today, but on the next 3 sessions for gravel roads design and maintenance. There are a few housekeeping items I want to go over with you, and then we'll start moving things through with the actual course. The first one is in your GoToWebinar box, there is a handout section. If you expand that, you'll notice that there are 5 items in there. We have a handout. It says Online Introduction Design, and that's a copy of today's slides. So if for some reason you can't download it, don't worry, I will email it out to you after the webinar completes, but I just wanted you to know that it's there. I also threw in a couple of other flyers just for good measure about upcoming webinars. But I want to point out that I did put the gravel roads design and maintenance flyer in there as well, because I noticed that there aren't as many people registered for the next 3 sessions as there was for today's. And in order to get full credit for this course, you do have to take all 4 sessions. So if you haven't signed up for the other 3 sessions yet, please make sure you download that flyer and get yourself registered for the next 3 sessions. I'll send that out on a follow-up email as well. And then there's a few other items in there. We have ins and outs of the OH1, which is Ohio's crash report. We have that webinar tomorrow. If you've ever wanted to know anything you could possibly data mine out of our crash report here in Ohio, the person who has been involved in the Traffic Records Coordinating Committee and the rewrite of that form is going to be providing the webinar for us. So it should be a really good event. And then we have a replay of our Ethics for Engineers. That was so popular last Thursday. We actually maxed out the software. So we're going to do a replay of that. And if you need engineering credit for your license renewal, the replay session will still give you that certificate of participation as long as you're on there the whole time. And then our Northwest Ohio group from APWA is going to offer a lunch and learn later this month on how they've been responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you're interested in hearing what is going on in Northwest Ohio and how other local agencies are handling these new responsibilities, please feel free to join us for that one. That's in the handout box as well. So I'm done with my LTAP commercial. The only other thing I want to ask before I turn things over to Bruce is that if you would please look for the question box in the GoToWebinar panel. And I'd like for you to drop me a hi or hello or good afternoon in there. I want to know that you have found this box, because this is where I'd like for you to ask any questions you have for Bruce. He'll be stopping periodically to ask me if there's anything in there. So I want to make sure you know where it's at. Also, there's going to be a few items that he's going to ask you to respond to in the box. So I want to make sure you know where it's at as well. With that, I believe that's all I have. Bruce, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Victoria.
Thanks, all yours.
All right, thank you. First, I'd like to take and welcome everybody to this webinar. And like Victoria had mentioned, it's the design and maintenance of gravel roads. And it's set up in a 4-part series, and we'll talk about each one of those parts here in just a second. But first, let me introduce myself just a little bit. Okay. I'm having a little bit of a issue with the program. There we go. Okay, so like I said, I'm Bruce Drews. I've been in transportation, maintenance, construction for well over 40 years now. I originally started out working for the Idaho Transportation Department back in the late 70s, early 80s, and then I spent about 19 years in construction and maintenance for the Idaho Transportation Department before I moved into training and education. Then in 2000, I moved from the Idaho Transportation Department to the University of Idaho to be a part of the Idaho T2 program at the University of Idaho. In 2013, I retired from the Idaho T2 program, or the Idaho LTAP program, and moved over to retirement where I've been traveling around the United States doing a number of courses on both OSHA requirements, as well as some gravel roads maintenance, some work zone traffic control, a number of other courses. I did, as an interesting note, this last summer, I've visited all 50 states and a couple of territories in the last, since my retirement. So I've been pretty busy, but life's been good. Now, I also need to take and acknowledge Mr. David Jones. He's actually the chair of the Low Volume Roads Committee for the Transportation Research Board. His primary job is with the University of California Pavement Research Center down in Davis, California. But his heart really sits in gravel roads or unpaved road surfaces. And David Jones, as well as a number of other individuals out of FHWA, as well as a couple of LTAPs, we actually had a desk scan that we performed about 10 years ago, and we traveled to a number of different states looking at the unpaved road dust control and also the various stabilization treatments that organizations were using. Our primary states that we traveled to were Idaho, Montana, Colorado, and Arkansas. We spent quite a bit of time in each state looking at a lot of different gravel roads. But David Jones and I put together this program. He is a valuable resource, and if somebody needs some additional information or wants to get a hold of him, you can contact me, and I'd be more than happy to share his information with you. So what we're going to take a look at as far as this course is concerned, we're going to today, of course, this course is only an hour and a half long, so I've got a lot of information to cover, but we're going to take a look at some of the gravel roads issues. We'll also take a look at the design of a gravel road, the purpose, and also what has a major impact to those gravel roads, the structure of the gravel road, and also then we'll take a look at the gravel road materials and the need for compaction. And then later on in the program, we'll actually get into the materials a lot deeper than what I'm going to do today. But the same token, we will cover some of that gravel roads materials. Then on June 11th, we'll actually take a look at the gravel road as far as its subgrade type of materials, the type of materials, the issues with frost, with freezing, with water on those subgrade materials. And then we'll get into more of the information about the materials itself. What are the ideal materials? What type of testing or specifications do we need to have with our materials? And that's one of the things I keep telling local jurisdictions, that anything you buy, if you're buying gravel roads materials, if you're buying asphalt, if you're buying chip sealing material, any of those materials, you need to have a specification for it. And you need to trust but verify that you're getting the material you're purchasing. I've seen it happen a number of different times as I've worked with a lot of different jurisdictions where a contractor will come in and either crush a materials, or they'll buy a material that is sold as a gravel road material, but it's not very functional as a gravel road material. And so making sure you have a specification, you test the material to make sure you're getting what you're paying for, and we'll talk about what type of tests and how to perform those tests in the materials section that'll be occurring on June 11th. Then on June 16th, we're going to be talking about grading those gravel roadways, the importance of taking and going out and doing regular maintenance on those roadways. But also we'll talk about a little bit of the issue of degrading our roadways, our gravel, our unpaved roadways, by not doing the grading correctly. And so we'll talk about some of those issues, the need for moisture when you're doing your deeper type of grading, and also the need for compaction, and also your traffic control for a grader operation, or it's another item that we'll be discussing. And then the final course, which is on the final of the 4 programs, which will be on June 18th, we're going to talk about stabilizers. Stabilizers are an item that I found over the years that a lot of people really, they use a lot of different types of stabilizers, but they don't a lot of times understand how those stabilizers are going to impact the roadway and what you can do with those stabilizers, what stabilizers can be reworked, what stabilizers can't be reworked. And so I see people going in and installing a stabilizer and then having issues with when they come back in and grade that roadway again because it got a little rough. And so we'll talk about the different families, because there's primarily 5 families of stabilizers, even though there's well over 300 brand names. And so we'll talk primarily about the families, because that's the critical element about those stabilizers. So before I move into this next slide, I'd like to ask Victoria, on my introduction, have you received any questions so far?
Nope, none so far.
Okay, so when we take a look at the unpaved roadway, like a paved roadway, you have 2 primary factors that in fact affect the life of that roadway: the weather and the traffic. The weather, of course, whether it's rain or snow or some other types of precipitation, can impact either a paved road or an unpaved roadway. But there's some differences of how they're impacted, and we'll talk about those here in just a moment. Then there's also the issue of traffic. Now, I hope everybody that's listening that has or manages unpaved roadways have both a management plan for those paved roadways as well as a management plan for those unpaved roadways, meaning that you take a look at the construction of those roadways, what's the traffic volumes of the roadways, what type of vehicles do you have running on those roadways. And when you look at the national standard or the national road mileage, you know, unpaved roadways are a major component. It's almost half of our road system in the United States. Of the 4.4 million miles of roadways that we have in the United States, almost half of them are unpaved. And that does not include the Forest Service roadways, the BLM roadways, or a lot of those other roadways that we use pretty extensively out here in the West. So the numbers are pretty high. And so in that management plan, you need to think about your vehicle miles traveled. How many vehicles do you have running on that roadway? And look at the design of that roadway to make sure that it's going to be able to carry that load that those vehicles are going to take in and impact on that. But we'll talk about that more in just a moment. So weather, you know, I'm out here in Boise, Idaho. I've lived here most of my life, but by the same token, we get a little bit of snow, we get the freeze and the thaw, actually recently we've been getting a lot of rain, which all impact that unpaved roadway. So, when you look at it, you've got to take and think about that water that's going to take, and as it hits that roadway. Now, a pavement with an asphalt roadway, you've got a hard surface, a weight-bearing surface that's on that roadway, that when that water hits, ideally, it'll run off of that roadway because it has a crown. And generally, that paved roadway is a 2% crown. Well, on an unpaved roadway, we don't have that hard surface. We have that gravel. And if our gravel is allowed to take and have that moisture, that water hit it, it's going to take and cause soft spots. It's going to cause rutting, going to cause, the potholes, going to start causing problems in our roadway. And so we need to take and make sure that we have the proper type of crown so that that water runs off. But by the same token, we don't want the water to run off too fast, or we don't want the water to run from one side of the roadway clear across the roadway to the other side of the roadway, because the volume is going to get to the point where it's going to carry our fines and put our fines right into our ditch, where they're not going to do us a lot of good. And so we've got to take and be sure that we are armoring our roadway, our unpaved roadways, by putting in the proper type of slope. And also when we grade them, we want to take and make sure that we grade the crown into it and we put the crown in the right location, which we'll discuss here in just a moment. The other item is traffic. Now, it's interesting. The University of Colorado actually was the first university that I knew of that actually did a study to take a look at traffic's impact on that roadway. And what they had actually accomplished is they took a half-ton pickup truck, put a vacuum system on it, and then captured the air behind the tailgate of the pickup truck as it drove down the roadway. And as they were taking and doing that test, as you look at a vehicle traveling down that unpaved roadway, you see a lot of dust coming up off that roadway. And so they ended up taking and coming along and capturing some of that dust. And if you take a look at the report, they took that dust and drove it down 1 mile of roadway, measured the dust, and then estimated if that same pickup traveled that same mile of roadway every day for a year, one trip out, one trip back, they would lose 1 ton of dust off that roadway. 1 ton. And you think about, what is dust? Dust is that binder that you want in that material, so you're going to be able to hold it together. And then if you have more than 1 or 2 vehicles traveling on that roadway again a day, you're going to be losing a lot more of that binder that you're going to need on the roadway. And then you also take a look at your roads and you look at the vehicles. Where are the vehicles traveling? If you have a roadway that's 20, 24 inches or 20 or 24 feet wide, you should have 4-wheel paths. Because if you only have 2-wheel paths or 3-wheel paths, they're only using a little piece of your roadway instead of using the whole roadway, which means that they're generally going to be traveling on the crown of your roadway, which means that they're going to beat your crown down, they're going to make it flatten out. And so then when you get rain or you get snow and it starts to melt, you're going to develop soft spots, you're going to develop potholes right out there in the middle of the roadway, and it's going to create a major problem for you. So you want to be able to get those 4-wheel tracks across that roadway. And we're going to talk about some of the issues and problems that I see with people trying to get those 4-wheel tracks as they travel down the roadway. So the volume of the traffic, the size of the traffic. I mean, you get out into some of our communities that have the oil wells on them, or they have a big dairy on them, or some of those where they have heavy truck traffic. Those trucks beat the tar out of those roadways. And so some of the times we need to actually take a look at and maybe upgrade the material that we're using on that roadway to be able to carry those bigger truck traffic, that heavier loads. And so those are some of the things we need to think about. So as you look at these 4 pictures, I have 4 pictures and I have each one of those pictures numbered there and on the screen for you. So what I'd like to ask you, which of these pictures show the most common problem that your client or people complain about? Picture number
And what,
one, of course, is the potholes. Question number two is the washboarding or corrugation. Number three is loose material, and four is dust.
well, so far we've got number two, and we got a couple ones and a couple of fours. There's another one. Lots of ones and fours now. Now it's just primarily ones. There's some more
Okay.
twos. Nobody's picking three. All right, Bruce. Yeah, it looks like 1 and 4 are your winners here.
1 and 4. Okay.
Yep.
So potholes are a big issue, which they are on most unpaved roadways, and we'll take a look at ways of dealing with those potholes. We'll also take a look on 4. Dust is a major issue, especially when you have houses out there along the roadway. Now, through an older study that I had seen back in when I was younger in my career, I saw a study that said that for every house that's on a roadway, whether it's a paved or an unpaved roadway, you can anticipate about 10 vehicle trips per day for each house on that roadway. So in this picture that we have here, we have one house out there, and as you get those 10 vehicles driving up and down that roadway, they're going to create some of the dust. We're going to lose a lot of our binder that we need on that roadway. And so eventually that roadway is going to get corrugated, going to get the washboards in it. It's going to get the loose gravel in it because we don't have the right mix of product on that roadway to keep it there. And then that person in that house is going to probably complain about that dust, especially if the prevailing wind in the area is right towards their house. They're going to complain about that. Now, it's interesting. Picture number one, of course, is a picture of potholes, which generally speaking, you'll see potholes really develop fast if your road's too flat. If you're taking, and it's like a conversation I had a few years back with a motor grader operator. I'd asked a class, I said, okay, about how many miles of roadway can you grade in a day? And I had one grader operator raise his hand, and he sits there and says, well, I can get 20 miles a day. And I said, and how often is your blade touching the ground? When you take and you get somebody, get a jurisdiction and they have a lot of miles, because all the local jurisdictions have a lot of these unpaved roadway miles. And sometimes the grader operators, they say, well, we need to get that roadway graded as quick as possible. So they'll take and they'll grade that gravel roadway, and they'll pull it off of one shoulder up towards the middle, and then they'll pull it from the other shoulder up towards the middle, and then they'll just run their grader right down the middle and push it out, and you have a flat roadway. Well, that flat roadway is going to hold that water on that roadway. And then every place there's a little bit of a puddle, it's going to soften up that surface gravel and your subgrade and start making you potholes. Number 2, corrugations or washboards. That's a pretty common problem I see, especially in my part of the country, where we get a lot of, elevation change and quite a bit grade to the roadway, and the gravel starts losing its dust or its binder, and then the cars start to take and dig it into little bumps. And a lot of people will say, well, that's the cars and the trucks that are doing that. And I'll tell you this, it's not. It's the degrading of the gravel surface material that's causing that allows the material to be moved by the cars and the trucks. And that's what makes your washboards. And then, of course, picture number 3, which some people, I've seen it a lot, where you get a lot of loose gravel along the roadway, and that's generally because you don't have enough binder in your material to hold it together, or you've lost a lot of your binder. And so the gravel is starting to ravel. Now, in every one of these pictures, we're going to talk about it in the grading and also the material section. But by the same token, one of the things I see a lot taking place is we get into a little bit of a hurry, or we have so many miles to grade that we take and we just cut the tops off of the washboards or cut the tops off of the potholes and put the material into the potholes. Well, if you're dumping gravel, just plain rock into a hole or into a washboard, it's going to take a matter of an hour or a couple hours of that traffic to beat it right out of there, and you're going to be back to the same situation. And so we'll talk about in the grading section, we'll talk about, how to take care of that roadway, how to take care of that material. I always have a saying that I tell people is that, if you do the same thing you've always done, you'll always get the result you've always gotten. And if you're happy with that result, that's great. But in these pictures, people are not happy about these roadways. And so we need to take and look at maybe ways of trying to preserve our gravel, ways of taking and making sure that we can keep it together, ways of keeping that binder that we need so badly in that road. So when you look at those potholes, like I said, this roadway's too flat, it's holding water, your potholes are going to form fairly quickly anytime it rains. And so you're going to see these types of problems. The washboards, one interesting part of the washboard, you can measure across 4 of those bumps and get the distance and actually calculate up how fast the car or the truck was traveling that made it. Now, I've heard some people say, well, it's the motor grader, Well, it's the motor grader, the cars, the trucks can all create those washboards, but it's all a sign of a poor material, a material that's not going to hold together, and you grade it back out and your washboards will come back in. So we'll talk about ways of dealing with those washboards. And like I said, you have 3 wheel paths on this roadway. You have loose material in between each of those wheel paths. And for everyone that takes and works on a gravel roadway, if you have 2 tracks or 3 tracks on a gravel roadway, where's the car going to run? Where's the truck going to run? He'll run in those 2 tracks, those 3 tracks. And there's reasons they do that. And we're going to talk about those reasons as we go throughout the program. But ideally, what you want is you want those cars to run on their side of the road so that they create 4 wheel tracks. That way they don't wear your road out so quickly, and they won't have the problems that you'd normally have. So the 3 wheel paths. Loose gravel or loose rock is a problem. I see it all the time, and it's an indication you've lost your binder, which I see happen a lot of times when you have a motor grader that goes out and the gravel on the surface is dry, and that motor grader operator goes along and cuts the top of that roadway, trying to fill in those washboards, fill in those potholes, fill in those items. But as they're cutting that dry material, you're losing your binder, you're segregating your aggregate, and it's going to create problems. I tell people, if you have a roadway that has a good solid surface on it, don't touch it. Even if it's a little bit rough, don't touch it, because if you go in there and dry grade it, you're going to open that up and allow that binder that you need to be blown off the roadway, and it'll get a lot dustier until it gets rid of all that binder. And then of course dust. And that's the one thing that you want to be able to hold on to, is that dust or that binder that's in your roadway, because that's what's going to hold that sand together, that holds that rock together. You need all those different components to be able to hold that aggregate together. Now, one of the questions I'd like to ask, of this audience, how many of your agencies buy or purchase material to use on gravel road system? And do you have a spec for it? Do you have a specification? Sounds pretty quiet, Victoria.
I know we're getting a few responses in. I think it's because it was a longer answer question.
Okay.
Some people said they're not sure. Very few do. Somebody said we do 3/4 minus or 1 1/4 minus. One person said yes to both.
Okay.
Yeah. And it looks like it's maybe local agencies, not necessarily state agencies, that have the yes answers.
Yeah, and that's usually what happens. You know, the agencies, the local jurisdictions, especially on unpaved roadways. You know, you take a look at the Ohio spec, and in the Ohio spec book, they have a number of different gradations, but none of them are really an unpaved road specification. And so most of the local jurisdiction will have their own specification. And in the class on Thursday, we'll talk about what elements should be in that specification. But the biggest thing that I find too is that in some agencies, they purchase their aggregate, not purchase it, but they view it that they get their aggregate for free. They have a gravel source of some sort that they can just go over there with a loader and put it into a dump truck and haul it out onto the roadway. And I tell them, the second you touch that aggregate, you have money in it. And so it's not free. You got to pay for that loader operator, you got to pay for that loader, you got to pay for that dump truck, you got to pay for all that activity. And then if you still have a poor roadway, are you really getting your money's worth? You know, free is not always the best thing. So, you know, when we take a look at those unpaved roadways, you know, we've got to take a look at what type of material are we going to use? How many times are you grading that gravel roadway? How much work are you having to put towards that roadway to keep your client happy? And we'll talk about all those different things. So what I want to do now is let's take a look at 7 cost-effective suggestions to manage some of these problems. Okay, 7 cost-effective ways to manage these problems. Road shape. Like I said, our road shape is very important. You know, there's the paved road, the road that has asphalt on it. You know, in a straight section of roadway, we want to have a 2% crown. But a 2% crown on a unpaved roadway is not going to shed the water the way that it's supposed to shed. And so it's going to create those potholes and those segregation areas. And so we're going to have problems with it. So the road shape is very important. Now, what type of road shape do you have on your gravel roadway? Is it flat, polybaric, a U-shaped, in and out, or an A shape?
One person responded already, and they said they've always used a 3% cross slope. Someone else has an A shape.
Okay.
A shape, a parabolic and in and out, an A, an A, an A, parabolic, A shape.
Okay. So let's
Yeah,
take
for the most
it's
A.
oh, pardon me.
Sorry.
That's okay. It sounds like, you know, a lot of you are saying A shape, and let's talk about each one of these shapes and what is kind of the impact and what type of roads I've seen that they use these different types of shapes on. A flat roadway, I've seen a number of agencies that have a flat roadway. And generally speaking, it's a roadway that maybe the operator doesn't feel he has a lot of time, and so with 3 passes on that roadway, on a flat roadway, he can pretty much grade the material from one side of the roadway to the other side of the roadway, and he doesn't have to worry about a crown, and so they can get graded really quickly. Now that's what I've been told, but by the same token, that flat shape creates a lot of problems for us because the water sits on it. You get puddles, you get potholes, you get a lot of issues with that flat shape. And so that's not a very desirable type of roadway. Now, the polybaric type of curve is also that type of curve of roadway where people are trying to minimize some of their passes that they have to take and make. And so that curve ends up being, you have a crown, you have a little bit of a slope, but it's kind of flat right in the middle. And a lot of the times, is that where you could possibly be getting potholes there? You can actually see some segregation right there in the middle of the roadway. And generally speaking, on that type of roadway, you'll get 2 wheel tracks or maybe 3 at the most. You won't get 4 wheel tracks on that type of roadway. And generally speaking, if you get a roadway that gets some rain on it, you're going to see a lot of potholes in the middle of that roadway. Now, the U-shaped roadway, I actually see a lot of this in the state of Nevada. The state of Nevada, they have a lot of fairly fine aggregates, a lot of sand, not a lot of clay, and a lot of times they'll take and borrow out of their ditch or borrow out of their bank and bring material out onto the roadway and actually use it as their road base or their driving surface. And what you end up doing is taking and you actually end up building that U shape. Well, that creates some big problems, especially if you get, in Nevada, they don't get a lot of rain. But when they do, all their roads are really miserable because the water settles right into that roadway and soaks up that road material. And then the trucks and the vehicles are all driving to get down that roadway are packing that material with them. And so they lose a lot of that material and then they have to go back out and grade it. So that's not a very desirable shape. The in and out. Here in Idaho, the Forest Service uses a lot of the in and out. The BLM, Bureau of Land Management, uses a lot of the in and out. And you get onto those smaller types of roadways, those roadways that are 18, well, less than 18 feet wide. Get into those 16-foot wide, those 14-foot wide, or even that 10-foot wide roadway. That's where you see a lot of the in and out type of grading, and that's because the roadway is so narrow to be able to put an actual crown in it, build that A-shaped type of crown in it, would be impractical, and it makes the driver very uncomfortable. And so generally speaking, what you'll see on those small, low volume types of roadways is you'll see the in and out type of grading to where you can get the water to shed into either a ditch or right off the slope without getting the water to travel too fast and cause washing of that roadway. Generally speaking, so on those smaller types of roadways, you may see a lot of the in and outs. The ideal situation is the A shape. A shape. So you want the crown of the roadway right in the center of the roadway. You don't want it drifting back and forth, because if you have it drifting back and forth, people will take and when they're driving on their side of the roadway, they'll hit that crown and their car will rock, and they'll take and panic a little bit, so they'll move to the center line of the roadway. So they're farther away from the edge lines. And so you want to make sure that that crown is right in the center. The other thing you want to be sure of is that your crown is at a 4%. The reason I say a 4% is that what we have found through years of looking at unpaved roadways and experience is that if you increase that crown, I have had people say, oh, well, we take and we build it at a 6% because our traffic's going to pound it down. Well, why is your traffic pounding it down if they're not, unless they're running on top of the crown? You don't want them on top of the crown. But at a 6% cross slope from the center line to the edge line, you're going to take and have too steep of a grade. And so people, to drive that, they have a lot of torsion on the steering wheel to keep their vehicle traveling straight. And they're unaccustomed to that. They're not comfortable with that. And so they'll move up on top of your crown at a 6%. The other issue you run into is when you get into that steep of a crown, is that when the water hits the roadway, it's going, and you get a pretty good rainstorm, that water is going to pick up velocity running across the roadway, and it's going to pick up your fines, pick up your sand, pick up your material, and drag it down into the ditch. So we found that the best crown is a 4% crown. A 3% crown can work, but you're going to have a little bit, you won't drain your water quite as nicely, but you need to have that consistent crown. And so when we start talking about graders and the use of graders for some of your road type of activity, we're going to talk about how important it is for that motor grader, that maintainer, to be able to keep that crown and to build that crown. So when we have a mental picture, and a motor grader operator always has a mental picture of what he or she wants to take and use that motor grader to build, and building that crown, that A-shaped type of crown is ideal. You also need to take and then build your side slopes. Make sure your side slopes, ideally what you want to do with your and having your side slopes is you want your side slopes to be 4-to-1 or flatter. 4-to-1 or flatter. If you have a side slope along your roadway, and let's say it's a 2-to-1, a 2-to-1 slope is classified as a hazardous slope, because if a car goes off that slope, what it's going to do is it's going to roll. And so that's going to create some problems for the people inside that vehicle. Now let's say, okay, let's go to a 3-to-1 slope. Well, a 3-to-1 slope, if a car runs off the roadway, the car will travel to the bottom of the slope. It cannot take and stop on that slope. It will travel to the bottom. So it still has some hazards. So ideally, in an ideal situation, we want to have those side slopes off the shoulder of the roadway down into the ditch to be a 4-to-1 or flatter. 4-to-1 or flatter. And then of course, we want to take and be able to have our ditch line, and we want that ditch line to be able to run the water away from the road. So make sure the ditches are clean, make sure that they don't have a lot of obstructions to them, and that the water is able to flow out. If you're taking and you have a ditch line and you have a pond in it with cattails, that pond will be up underneath your roadway and cause you to have a soft roadway, because that water is going to infiltrate underneath that roadway prism, and you're going to have problems. So you want to make sure that your ditch lines are able to take and drain that water out. The last item that you want to take a look at is that back slope, that coming up out of the ditch. If you've taken and cut some of the material away, that back slope, you can get to a 2-to-1 or flatter, because that's normally not where vehicles run, but you don't want it so steep that if a vehicle hits it, it's going to cause an impact to that vehicle. You want them to be able to, if they have to, run up onto it. And so when we look at that ideal mental picture, an A-shaped crown with a 4% slope to it. Then you want to have a 4-to-1 slope from the shoulder of the roadway to the bottom of the ditch, and the ditch needs to be deeper than the subgrade of the roadway. I'll show you a picture of that here in just a moment. And draining, so that it's going to drain that water away from it. Any questions so far?
There was one question, but you answered it concerning the max slope for a typical in and out shape. And then there
Okay.
was some additional commentary, which I'm just going to save for you to be able to review afterwards, and then you can address it in the next session.
Okay, that sounds great. Sounds most excellent. I appreciate the questions. This whole online training and informational is I prefer face to face, but
Oh,
this
don't we
this type
all?
of
Yeah.
system works well.
There was one extra question that came in after I said that someone wanted to know how you would measure 4-to-1 because they had not heard of that term before.
Okay, a 4-to-1 slope. So if you take a look at it, for every foot down, you want to go 4 feet out. Okay, so that would be a 4-to-1 type of slope. So let's say on this side slope here from the shoulder, as you come down off that shoulder and you come down off that shoulder 1 foot, you should be actually 4 feet away from that shoulder. And well, actually, if you take a look at this drawing, let's say I have it's 2 feet from the top of the shoulder to the bottom of the ditch. So the distance from the shoulder to the bottom of the ditch should be 8 feet horizontal. And that'll make your 4-to-1 slope. And let me know if you need a little more explanation than that. It's not a problem, but that's the easiest way I know of explaining it.
And they said they've got it. And then one other person wanted to know what your thoughts were on ditch stone what are your thoughts on ditch stone on gravel roads?
I actually like, depending upon the grade of the ditch, sometimes your ditch has a pretty steep grade to it and they have a tendency to wash out. So taking and coming in and either putting in a ditch stone to take and slow the water down and keep it from washing the material out, or in some cases even coming in and putting in a little bit of a berm to slow the water down and allow the material to drop out of the water so it doesn't wash out the ditch. But you need to take and make sure that they're able to, they don't create a hazard. You want them to be gentle enough of a berm that vehicles are able to go over it and not impact it. So ditch stone, especially in your part of the country, there in Ohio, as well as a number of the other states, where you have a fairly fine soil type, and you get down into that ditch, and the best way is to actually, line the ditch with some stone, or create the little berms to slow the water down so it doesn't take and keep getting your ditch deeper and deeper and deeper, because then it's going to create you problems. So the second picture on this slide is not our desirable type of road view or mental picture of that roadway. It's got the rounded top. It's got, each of those slopes off the shoulder are each a little different. It doesn't have a good clean ditch or a good clean embankment. So we want that good, clear understanding of what that roadway should look like. Now, when a couple of things that I like to really stress with unpaved gravel road surfaces, 99.9% of the roadways you're maintaining or you're working with whatever you've got there. And that's just the whole thing with the unpaved gravel roadway. They're viewed as being a lower cost alternative to a paved roadway and generally lower volume. But by the same token, they have a paved roadway and an unpaved roadway have some of the same characteristics. When you're building a roadway, whether it's paved or unpaved, and you want to take and use that natural ground as your base, first you want to make sure that that natural ground is crowned. Same crown that you're going to put in the surface of the roadway. So that subgrade area, as you come from your shoulders towards the center line of that roadway, if you're building a 4% crown in that unpaved roadway surface, you want to have that same crown in your subgrade. And then the other thing that I'd like to take and get people to think about is that, ideally, you do not want to be borrowing material out of your subgrade to level up your roadway, because then you're going to contaminate your gravel road surface material with whatever material you had in the subgrade. So you need to make sure that your road surface material is deep enough so when your grader operator comes out and he or she are going to cut down to the bottom of the potholes, the bottom of the wheel ruts, the bottom of all those imperfections, blend that material back together and lay it back out, they have enough material there to work with. And they're not getting into all the other material that you have down your subgrade, because that's going to create a problem for your surface material. So you need to take a look at and making sure that you're using this diagram of the ideal road or unpaved roadway design, where you have your subgrade, you built your grade, and then you put your gravel road surface on the top of it, and also maintaining your ditches, your foreslopes, and your back slopes. Okay, come on. Okay, why not? I have a little problem advancing again.
Yeah, sometimes the technology works and sometimes it doesn't, Bruce.
Yes, I know.
I'm thinking bottom left-hand corner, maybe if you hover down there, it might show you some buttons that'll let you advance through your PowerPoint.
Yeah, I'm not even getting my mouse right now.
Huh.
It's
Well, I'm sure if you give it a second, it'll catch up with you.
yeah, let's see.
Is it like the whole computer froze up?
Yeah, I believe it might be the computer. Can I stop sharing for just a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say that might be one way to get things going again, is to stop sharing and then start sharing again. And while Bruce is doing that, for anyone who might have joined late, we do have some handouts in the handout section of the GoToWebinar box, including copies of slides from today's presentation. So if you can't download them from there, though, don't worry, because we'll be putting or excuse me, emailing those out to everybody. So is it still giving you some grief there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got me locked up.
Okay. Well, do you want
Look,
me to switch over to me running it for you, and I'll just click through the slides? I
if
can
you'd
do
like
that.
to.
Yeah. I'll just use the PDF you had sent me that we made available to everybody. So let me get that pulled up here real quick.
That's perfect.
Okay. There's more than one way to get this accomplished. So
Yes, there is.
people in public works are very resourceful. So, all right, I'm opening that file up on my computer, and I got to get down to the slide where you were at. Sorry.
I think it just changed on me.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, it's to the movie.
Oh, well, do you want to go ahead and run the movie then?
Yeah, let's go ahead and run the movie.
That sounds good. And I've got it pulled up if we need to go back to that when we're finished.
Yep,
So
it's working
everybody,
now.
oh, excellent. All right.
Hi, I'm Ken Scorset. Did you know that more than half of the roads in America have a gravel surface? It's true, and that means that gravel roads are a critical part of the transportation system. We depend on them every day to get products to market, our children to school, mail delivered, and to get us on out to the primary roads. And that's why most people are not shy about complaining to public officials when they see problems on gravel roads. So when you are maintaining gravel roads, you are contributing in a big way to the safety, comfort, and convenience of your community. You can really take pride in that. The three most important things covered in this presentation are safety, for you and for the public. Roadway shape, something you accomplish mostly by using a motor grader correctly. And good surface gravel. I'll show you what it is and what it isn't. To do the job right, you have to understand all three. I'll explain what to do and why to do it, but only your commitment to quality will motivate you to learn how to do it. In this presentation, I'll focus on the shape of the roadway and the shoulders, the parts you drive on. The roadway has to be shaped like this. This is the driving surface, and here are the shoulders. And here are the foreslope, the ditch, and the backslope. The main purpose of the shapes of all these elements is to drain water efficiently away from the driving surface. There are three reasons to maintain this overall shape: safety, safety, and safety. I'll explain. By putting a crown in the driving surface, you're keeping the road safe by making sure water drains off into the ditch. To do that, you need a 4% slope, or very close to that. A 4% slope translates to a ½ inch of drop per foot. So for a road that's 24 feet wide, you should have a 6-inch crown. A 2 or 3% slope won't be enough to move the water off the driving surface. You'll get potholes and ruts fast. They can form within a day under heavy traffic, and that causes damage to vehicles, or it can even cause a driver to lose control. A road with an excessive crown is also a bad thing. With too much crown, the fine particles in the gravel will be washed to the shoulder under heavy rain. You need them to bind the other material together. The same thing could happen if the road is shaped like a loaf of bread, like this. Furthermore, the loaf of bread shape allows water to collect in the middle instead of draining into the ditch where you want it. Still, another safety factor has to do with where people choose to drive. If a road has excessive crown, people naturally decide to drive in the middle because that's the only way to keep the car level. So, you'll see just 2 wheel tracks like this. Or if a road is shaped like a loaf of bread, you'll see 2 or possibly 3 wheel tracks like this. In either case, if 2 cars heading toward each other are in the middle of the road, we're in for big trouble. There's an easy way to see if the road is shaped wrong. Just look at the wheel tracks. If they're in the middle like this, it's a sure sign of danger, and you need to reshape that road as soon as possible. Now, having said all of that, there are also places where you don't want a crown in the road, like where the gravel road crosses railroad tracks, or crosses a bridge, or at intersections. In all those places, you need to adjust the crown. And where the gravel road goes into a curve, you need to change the crown into a super elevated surface. When maintaining a super elevated curve, be sure to move the gravel from the outside of the curve where it tends to accumulate to the inside. That way you prevent the slope from getting too steep. Something else you don't want is a high shoulder like this. This can be caused by vehicles whipping gravel off of the surface to the shoulder, or from rainwater moving gravel to the shoulder line, or it can come from snowplows moving gravel to the shoulder line as they plow snow. All of this is more likely to occur when you have poor quality surface gravel on your road. But finally, the high shoulder can also come from incorrect use of a motor grader. No matter what causes them, high shoulders are trouble because they form a secondary ditch which stops water from draining off the road like this. So addressing high shoulders is an important part of maintaining overall roadway shape. There's another way to move gravel off of the shoulder or even out of the ditch. That's a shouldering disc, which as you can see here is a lot like a disc used for breaking up soil in a farm field. I can sum up what we've seen about roadway shape in 3 main points. Number 1, stay at or near 4% slope on the roadway. Number 2, you must adjust that 4% slope when the gravel road intersects with another roadway, with a rail crossing, or with a bridge. Number 3, you must fix high shoulders. In the next section, we'll take a look at the number 1 tool for achieving these goals.
As a quick reminder, Bruce, you've got to unmute yourself too, because the system automatically muted you when the video started. I'm not hearing you, Bruce, so you'll have to unmute on your end. I've sent Bruce a request to unmute himself too through the software, so he should be back on here in just a second. Or we're waiting for Bruce to come back on. I did want to make sure that everyone who's registered for today has also registered for the next 3 webinars, because you'll need to be on for all 3 in order to get the credit for the complete course. So hopefully Bruce isn't having issues with the software freezing up on him. So I am gonna see what I can do about maybe switching some things around and then putting it back over into his court here in a second. Yes, there are a total of 4 sessions. So, and for people who did not hear the audio while the video was running, I'm sorry, apparently, and I wasn't aware of this, that if you do a video, the audio won't come through on your cell phone. So I'm going to make note of that for the future, just to make sure that we don't encounter that problem again. But we do plan on having videos on the next 2 sessions. So I'm going to make myself the presenter for right now. show my screen instead of Bruce's, and then give Bruce a second. Oh, there you go. He's got unmuted. Was hoping that might do it. Well,
It did.
yay, there we go. All right. Do you want to be the presenter again, Bruce? I'll be happy to give it back to you.
If you want, just go ahead and can
Oh,
you
I don't
just
mind. Sure.
go through the slides?
I'd
I
be
don't know why
happy.
I'm having a problem with my
Okay.
computer.
Like I said, we got ways to figure this out. So you just tell me when you want me to click to the next one. So
Go ahead and go to the next one.
how's that? That's the one right after the video.
Oh, yep, that's perfect. That's
Okay.
perfect. So when you take a look at this roadway, of course, this roadway is a pretty small roadway. And if you'd like to go ahead and click to the next one, Victoria, and it's very narrow. Of course, in this type of roadway, you're not going to be able to do a crown. And of course, also with the person's lawn coming right up to the edge of your roadway, you know, if you came in and you cut that grass, you might have a few different complaints. But in this small of a roadway, this would be more of a candidate to do an in and out type of grading. And I'd actually think about taking and making the high side towards the grass, and then push the take the material off over towards the ditch over on your left-hand side of the screen to make your in and out. Let's go ahead and go to the next one, if you would.
Are you seeing it on your screen?
Yep, I've got it. And so in this situation, of course, we have a larger type of roadway. Here we're looking at actually it's a 24-foot roadway. Whoops. There we go. A 24-foot wide roadway. And in this situation, of course, you have enough room to be able to put in that A-shape type of crown. You can see that they've got a little bit of a problem with some loose material, but that A shape will work really well with this type of roadway. If we can go to the next.
Wait, Bruce, that looks like my old road.
This one here?
Yeah, I lived on for about 23 years.
Yeah, and of course, you know, as you take and look at this type of roadway, you know, here it's about a 20-foot wide roadway. You can take and look at the wheel tracks in it. You're not getting those 4-wheel tracks, but it's also getting a little narrow. And so making sure that you grade, clear out, get rid of the vegetation on the shoulder. I prefer to try and leave the vegetation in the ditch because that's an environmental, and try and keep the siltation from traveling down into the ditch and creating some problems. But here, this roadway, you know, you're right at the edge of being able to put a A-shaped crown in it versus an in and out type of slope. If we can go to the next one. Are you able to get to the next one, Victoria? Oh, there we go. So of course, here's another example of a wider type of roadway. And if you take a look at it, and you can actually pretty much see the 4 wheel tracks in it. You can see the 2 wheel tracks over on the left-hand side. You can kind of see a crown line, and then the wheel tracks over here on the right-hand side of the roadway. So they're getting people to use that entire road segment. And that's the ideal situation that you want to have, is you want those people to use that entire roadway, because then it doesn't wear your road surface material out, doesn't create those washboards quite as quickly, doesn't create problems or situations for you. So we need to take a look at, why do people have a tendency to take and run on one side are in the middle of that roadway, and what can we do to take and keep that from happening. So if we could go to the next slide, Victoria, then we can take a look at that need for those four wheel paths. And like I said, if you envision yourself as the driver, as you're driving down the roadway, and on a 2% paved roadway, you have just a little bit of slight pressure towards the center line of the roadway to kind of keep yourself going straight down the roadway. And then as you come out onto an unpaved roadway with a 4%, you're going to have just a little bit more pressure as long as you're staying on your side of that center line of the roadway. And generally speaking, there's a number of different things that cause us to have two wheel paths, three wheel paths, but we want to get to where we have those four wheel paths. So if we can go to that next slide, Victoria. So here's a roadway. You take a look at it, and it's actually a treated roadway. This is actually out of the Midwest, that a roadway that I'd worked on in the Midwest. You can take a look at the road. They're getting the four wheel paths. It's holding up, and because it's a treated roadway, it even extends that maintenance activity out a little bit further. This is actually, most people ask me, it's a mag chloride treatment that's on this roadway. But let's take a look at some other roadways and talk about what causes us to not get the four wheel tracks. So if we can go to the next slide. Center line of that roadway. If you think about it, we want to be able to have that center line consistently in the center of the road. And to some people that haven't ran very many motor graders, or maybe really haven't thought about it, running a motor grader and cutting that roadway, making sure that you put that center line in the center of the roadway, you've got to know what you're doing to be able to run it consistently. And so making sure that the people understand putting that center line where that center line is supposed to be is very important. So let's take a look at the next picture. It's a picture of a roadway that I worked on up in North Idaho. We're actually getting ready to take and we're grading the roadway out, and we're actually planning on doing a treatment, a stabilization treatment, a mag chloride treatment on it. You can see that the roadway in the foreground has actually been already treated, but you look at that berm of where the operator has taken and pulled the material up off the shoulder and brought it out into the roadway. He stacked it in the roadway and made it pretty much in the center of the line of the road. Then he blended that material. He has some moisture in it. It looks pretty dry, but it does have some good moisture in it. And he blended that material back out, and then he'll cut it back out of that berm and take it across the roadway so he can lay it out and create that 4% grade that entire length of that roadway, and make sure that that center line of the roadway is in the center of the road. So if we can go to the next slide, Victoria. The other thing is making sure that we have a consistent cross slope. Now, when I first started grading, running a motor grader back in the late 70s, early 80s, I started out on a John Deere and a Galleon and a Huber, and then moved up into a Champion and finally a Cat. The first time I got into a motor grader and I was working a section of roadway, the operator that I was working with that was kind of teaching me, he had actually taken a carpenter's level and taped it in the window, on the window frame. And then he actually had a mark, and he said, this is where the center of the bubble, and that will get you a 4% slope. That'll get you your slope. Because I've seen people say, oh yeah, I can feel when it's right. But the thing is each one of those slight shifts that you have in your mold board as you're cutting that material or laying that material back in, you're going to create a change in that slope, and those drivers will feel it. And if they're having to make adjustments to their steering wheel because your slope's going 3% and then going to a 4% and then going to a 6% and then going to a 4%, all those changes every time that steering wheel is going to move on that vehicle, and then they'll jump onto the center line of the roadway. So they get away from that shoulder of the roadway. So having a consistent cross slope is very important. And one of the simple tools we've used, of course, is the slope meter. Installing a slope meter in your motor grader. Matter of fact, I have a couple of jurisdictions that I've worked with that have gone to automatics in their motor grader to take and remove some of that change of the grade as you drive down the roadway. So let's go to the next slide, and it should be a picture of the, oops, it's not, it's a picture of the roadway. So here's a roadway that, you've got a good crown in it, you've got a consistent shoulder, you've got a consistent material in it, and you're obviously getting 4 tracks. It is a treated road, but by the same token, you can see that you're getting a good solid 4 tracks. And that way the people are using that entire road surface. If we can go to the next slide, I think. The other item that we talk about, the other issue that we have on unpaved roadways is our road edges aren't parallel. It's not consistently a 24-foot wide roadway. It may be a 24-foot wide roadway, but then when we come to a culvert that's maybe too short, our roadway comes in a little bit. Or we have turnouts where the roadway goes out. That consistency of that shoulder of the roadway is very important to make that driver feel comfortable that running on that edge of that roadway, that they're not going to have to keep switching back and forth over the center of the road and back again to get onto their side of the roadway. So having a consistently parallel road edges is very important. And I see it happen all the time where, maybe, or actually I've seen it happen sometimes where maybe the motor grader operator has taken and pushed the material out a little bit and then had to bring some of it back because he came up to a culvert or to a rock or to a tree or some other obstruction, and he has to go around it. Well, then that inconsistent road edge is going to create the concern of the traveling population. So if we can go ahead and change again, Victoria. So if you look at this roadway, of course it's a treated roadway, but by the same token, you look at it, those road edges are consistent running that entire road segment. The material looks like it's solid, looks like there's not a lot of loose material on it. It's pretty set in its location. You have a center line, a consistent slope of the roadway, all helping that driver feel more comfortable with that unpaved roadway. And then they'll travel on each side of that roadway. So if we can go ahead and go to the next one. Driveways. Every one of our unpaved roadways have driveways that come into them. And what I find is that if you have a driveway and say the driveway drops down off the roadway, a lot of times what will take place is as the farmer, the rancher, the individual that owns that roadway takes and wants to make their roadway come into the main road, a lot of times if it's lower than our road, they'll borrow material out of our roadway and drag it down into theirs a little bit. Well, that makes a little dip. So as the traveling population travels past that driveway, their car dips towards that driveway, and that makes them uncomfortable. So then they move to the center line of the roadway. Or the other one that I see quite often is if the driveway is above the traveling surface of our roadway, a lot of times is people are either doing work trying to smooth out their driveway, they'll drag some material out onto our roadway so that they have a smoother transition out onto the roadway, but that creates a bump. And that bump, the driver hits that bump and the steering wheel jumps a little bit, is going to create them a problem. So make sure that your driveways, the people aren't taking your material or using your material or adding your material. Keep the grade of your roadway is the prime emphasis for that roadway. Don't let those driveways intimidate that traveling population. Let's go to the next one, please. Roadside intimidators. We see it all the time. Mailboxes. Every local jurisdiction, they may have mailboxes along that roadway. And those mailboxes, especially when they're a cement or a brick mailbox or something massive in size, that'll intimidate that traveling population. They don't want to hit that. Or that farm machinery that's parked on the shoulder of the roadway, or well, here in Idaho, we have quite a bit of irrigation, and we may have wheel lines that have been left alongside the roadway. All those things alongside the edge of the roadway makes that traveling population intimidated by those items, and so they'll move out towards the center line of the roadway. Or especially in your winter time, if you have snow drifts or you have brush that's alongside the roadway that's creating a drift or creating a problem, they'll move out towards away from that so that they don't get stuck in that drift. And so all those things make people move towards the center. So we want to eliminate as many of those as possible. So let's go ahead and go to the next one, please. So here's an example. This is a mailbox. We were actually treating this roadway, and here the mailbox sticks out according to the requirements by the U.S. Postal Service. And look underneath the mailbox, and you can actually see where that distributor truck, he was driving along installing the product against the flow of traffic the first time, and he could see where that mailbox was right next to his truck. And so he's able to get his spray bar right underneath that mailbox. Well, when he turned around to put his second application of stabilizer on that roadway, it was on his offside, or his side he couldn't see really well on. And so he swung out around that mailbox a little bit. And that's what people will do. The same situation, which then they get tired of going around all those mailboxes, and then they'll move out to the center of the road. So you need to think about those things that are going to intimidate that traveling population. Eliminate those. Get those parallel edge lines, get those good clear edge lines so that those people don't travel out into the middle of the road. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the three most important things to remember about a gravel road. One, your material. And we're going to talk about material on Thursday. And that material is very important. You need to take and make sure you have a good material that you're using, and we'll talk about the items that you need to have good material. Also, make sure that you have drainage, that your drainage on that you have enough crown on your roadway so that the water will drain off the roadway and drain down into the ditch and then drain away from that roadway, so it doesn't get into the subgrade and cause you problems into your subgrade. The third item is, of course, shape. You need to make sure that that shape of that roadway, you've got the crowns right, you've got the shoulder slope is correct, getting that 4-to-1 type of slope, and making that roadway as consistent as possible so that that traveling population feels safe traveling down that roadway and uses the entire roadway, so you don't have as much maintenance and as much repair to do with those types of roadways. So like I said, Thursday we're going to be talking about the materials. Next Tuesday, of course, we'll be talking about grading that gravel roadway. And we'll talk about some of the techniques of dealing with that gravel, how to keep from segregating your gravel, how to keep and preserve that valuable resource of that gravel that you do have on your roadway. And then, of course, a week from Thursday, we'll be talking about stabilizers. So that's kind of what I have for today. And is there any questions that have came up about
Yep,
the program?
there are 2 questions in there for you. The first one is, so for a gravel road that has potholes already, what is the best way to fix or maintain it?
The best way to take and if it has potholes already in it, is to come in, and I personally like to, if the road material is damp, I mean, if it's dark and has some good moisture in it, cut to the bottom of the potholes and then build your crown back into your roadway. And then of course, if you all you have is your motor grader, you know, use your motor grader to compact that material back down so you can try and keep that crown. Ideally, since I live in an ideal world, I prefer to take and actually use that moisture, cut that down to the bottom of those potholes, because if you just scrape along the top and fill those potholes with gravel, they're going to pop right back out. So you got to cut down to the bottom of those potholes, remix your gravel so you get your binder back into it to where it's going to hold together, because your binder's probably laying right there. Mix it back together, get laid down, get a crown, good crown in it, and then compact it. And you
Okay,
said you
then
had another question?
I do. It says, we maintain roads that are similar to logging roads. If grading always starts and ends in one direction, will we be moving materials from one end of the road to the other end over time?
Yes, you will. So one of the things that I do tell people that they need to take a look at is that, you know, and that's the reason what we'll do in the grader section of the course, we'll actually talk about grading it and times that you're going to have to run against the flow of traffic. You need to make sure you put up your traffic control that people know you're out there, because that's a very dangerous situation. But if you keep running always the same direction, you will stretch your material, and you don't want to do that. You want to try and maintain that material in its location as much as you can. Otherwise, you start getting rocks or subgrade growing up through your gravel, and you don't want that.
Okay, that's all the questions we had, and we've got 2 minutes to spare, so I'm sure everybody will appreciate the fact that we ran on time here. Thanks so much, Bruce, for your time today and for working through the technical hiccups that we encountered. We'll look forward to having everybody back online again on Thursday for part 2. And is there anything else you wanted to add right now, Bruce?
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for participating. I know that we have a little bit of a different type of audience for this presentation than what we normally do, but I think it's a very good group, and I just wish I could actually see you and talk to you, but maybe we'll do that in the near future.
Yeah, hopefully about a year from now, we'll have you visiting Ohio.
I hope so. I hope so.
All
Look
right.
forward to it.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone. Stay safe. We'll talk to you Thursday. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.